Greetings, everyone. My name is Jignasha, and I am delighted to be moderating today's Awakin Talks. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. The purpose of this call is to share stories that nurture our own inner transformation while planting seeds for a more compassionate world. And we do this by holding collective conversations with guest speakers who inspire us to live in a service-oriented way. And behind every call, there is an entire team of service-based volunteers whose invisible work allows us to hold this kind of a space. Today, our special guest speaker is Vinod Sreedhar. To begin our call, we'll begin with a minute of silence to anchor ourselves in the present moment. And then the silence will be opened with a small prayer by Bhumika.
Sangachatvam samvadatvam samvo manansi janatam deva bhagam yatha purve sanjana upasate samaniv akuti samana hridayanivaha samaniv akuti samana hridayanivaha samanamastu vo mano yathavah susahasati sangachadvam samvadatvam samvo manansi janatam samano mantraha samitihi samane samano mantraha samitihi samane samanam manah saha Chitmesham Sangachadvam Samvadatvam Samvo Manansi Janatam Deva Bhagam Yatha purve sanjanana upasate sangachadvam samvadatvam samvo manansi Janatam.
Welcome again to our fortnightly Awaken Talks in conversation with Vinod Sreedhar. In a few minutes, we'll start our dialogue with our speaker. And by the top of the hour, we'll invite all of you to share your questions and reflections. At any time, you can submit your question or a comment using the webcast form on our live stream page. You can also email us at ask@servicebase.org. And just a friendly reminder, we are operating in the virtual space. with the usual constraints of technology, overloaded bandwidth, audio issues, etc. Things can and will go wrong and have gone wrong. So please know that if there is a technological glitch or other issues for any of the active speakers or for us, we'll just try and get back as quickly as possible. And thank you for your understanding. So it's a great joy for me today to be in conversation with a very dear friend, Vinod, and whom I have actually had the privilege of knowing for almost 15 years now. And I will go into a brief introduction of Vinod, and you'll get to hear his voice soon. So Vinod is an environmental educator, a social entrepreneur, an artist, a musician, and an all-round admirer of learning through experience. Vinod has facilitated workshops, projects on active citizenship, deep democracy, waste management for some of India's top colleges and organizations. He's the founder of Journeys with Meaning, where he takes young people and people of all ages actually on learning journeys to far corners of India, where you still get to experience some ancient cultures living in great harmony with nature. These journeys have been life-changing and life-altering for many, and actually have had a lasting impressions on a lot of young people who have gone on these journeys. Vinod weaves into these journeys a deep sense of respect, sense of awe, wonder, responsibility towards the planet, people, and the self. By taking you to deep places of sacred, within the self, and and seeing that around you, his journeys are like a kaleidoscope. They let you discover yourself, bringing to you forgotten wisdom, stories of value, and beauty of very little small things around you, which sometimes go very unnoticed. And we know from the very beginning, from a very young age, he has found a way to listen to his heart, and and has taken very unconventional roads. And he has been like a steadfast friend, a guide, and a mentor to a lot of young people who have dared to listen to their hearts. His gentle presence, generosity, sense of respect, introspective conversations, and deep listening has allowed many to pause, rethink, and reboot their life's path. So when I think of Vinod, I'm always reminded of the Robert Frost poem, The Road Not Taken, which goes like, two roads diverged in a yellow wood. And sorry, I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood and looked down, one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both the morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled. And that has made all the difference. So we have Vinod Sreedhar joining us from Goa. Welcome and thank you so much for being with us, Vinod.
Thank you, Jignasha. Thank you so much for that very, very warm welcome and for your wonderfully kind words. I'm not sure I was able to recognize myself in that description, but thank you so much. And yeah, looking forward to also sharing and also hearing from the people who are here with us today.
Awesome, Vinod. I think knowing you, I know that there are so many aspects of this that I have felt myself. So it's coming from first-hand experience. So Vinod, I think I was just wondering, maybe, do you want to start from this poem? The road less traveled. Maybe if you want to start there, and if you'd like to, maybe share from there, or maybe I can also give you another cue to start. Let me show you a picture, and if you can tell us a story about that picture. Let's see if you can recognize that picture. Yeah. Okay. Just give me a second. Can you see this picture?
I can, yes.
And do you recognize this picture?
Absolutely. One of my favorite
Yeah.
trees in the whole world.
All right. So maybe we can start there, Vinod. And if you can, if you can tell us the story of this tree, and where is this tree, and how does that, what imprints have that tree left on you?
So firstly, thank you for starting with a photograph of this very beautiful tree. It hit, always on a call, or like when you're facing a lot of people and all of that, there's a little bit of your mind kind of, is on that. And what this photograph did really is to take me back to a very happy place very quickly, and it was instant. Took me back to one of my happy places. And this happy place, as it happens to be, is in Ladakh, in a very pretty village called Hemishukpachan. And it's a village that we've been going to for many, many years now. In fact, several times a year, where we take our groups and spend time. And we never miss, a walk to this particular tree. So it's called the Ama Shukpa, or the Mother Shukpa. And the Shukma in Ladakhi means the juniper tree. And so this is one of these villages in Ladakh, which is kind of lower down in altitude compared to other parts of Ladakh, and usually tends to be a little greener. And this grove of juniper trees is, it's like evergreen. It's always green, and people come there in the winter to spend some time when the rest of Ladakh is very, it's quite barren and bleak looking. But this particular village has this wonderful, sacred grove, and lots of Ladakhis come there. Lots of other people also come there, and there's a reason why we take our groups over there. It's because this particular tree that you're looking at is over 2,000 years old, and so it's ancient. It's something that roots us to the land in a way that other things cannot. So while of course we are in Ladakh, very gorgeous place, beautiful place, but in going up to this tree and just hugging it for a little while, or just sitting at its at the base, and so it's quite a broad tree as well. So we sit under its canopy and spend some time just introspecting, thinking over things, or just like being silent. So that's what really like hit me, that it brought that silence back into my heart instantly as soon as I saw the picture. So thank you for sharing this. Yeah, and, I think it's a tree that we must all spend some time with. If not this one, other ancient trees, wherever we can find them.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and that's so beautiful. I mean, looking at a 2,000-year-old tree is such a rarity, and to be with something which is sometimes we can say way past the birth of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And that tree has seen so much, and it holds so much of wisdom if we can listen to it. It has seen different times, and I often feel that when I'm walking in Goa, where I stay, and these really old banyan trees, like really, really old banyan trees, and I'm like, I wonder what all have they seen over here. And it brings in a lot of humility. So Vinod, I was, with that, I was just wondering that, it's not common to take the path that you have taken. You walked out of college, you've taken a rather unconventional path, and it was not that you didn't like to study or learn, but, you took that path for very different reasons. And you've always been ahead of your time in that sense that, when people were forming non-profit organizations, you started with a social enterprise. When, way back, like 20 years ago, when nobody was even thinking about it. And so, a lot of those kind of decisions. So, what were some of your early, maybe, what was your childhood like? And what were some of your early influences that kind of led you to, make these choices, or maybe like, listen to something deeper within?
Great question. So I think as a child growing up in Bombay, I was in fact very much, doing all the conventional things that many of us end up growing up in, the usual paths that we take. Went to school, went to college, had a kind of, path mapped out in terms of what I'd like to do, MBA and other things. But somewhere along the journey, I also started reading a lot, started exploring different kinds of ideas a lot. And these ranged from, everything to do with environment to a little bit of spirituality, and just like anything that I wasn't already exposed to. So thankfully, I grew up in a house with a lot of books. And pre-internet days, I think that was a wonderful way to learn, just to be able to immerse myself in reading. And that opened up whole new worlds for me. So to begin with, I think that I was already privileged in that way, that my family valued reading and ensured that I never had, I never felt the absence of books. So I still remember a time when I was in school in Oman briefly, when my father was working there. And every month he would give me some money, and he would drop me off at one bookstore in the city. And I would be left alone to roam the aisles for like a couple of hours and picking up whatever I wanted. So very, very happy memories of that time. And going forward, I think that's the same spirit that has informed my life. That I'm very grateful to have family members who've supported this, friends who've supported this journey and these explorations. So I feel truly like fortunate for having that privilege of these people in my life. In terms of ideas, in terms of influences, I think a lot of what happened also very organically. So I happened to bump into people or a book that would open up a new way of thinking, and I would just kind of explore that path to see where it led me. So very quickly, even before I turned 14, 15 years old, I remember being, not falling into typical patterns very easily. Like, say, for example, I'm from a South Indian, like a Tamil family, where going to the temple was very important, or doing certain things which was very important. But I would question a lot of these things and say, you need to explain to me why I have to do these things. I'm not going to accept them blindly. So if you can give me a good enough reason as to why I should do this, I'm happy to do it. But if it doesn't make any sense, if you're just following it because somebody told you to follow it, I would probably not, do that unless it makes sense to me. So I think like that's how it has been since the time I was 14, 15 years old. And I've also happened to meet people at different ages. Happened to meet Leslie Nazareth, who's a very, very dear friend, mutual friend of ours, who kind of introduced me to the whole idea of going deeper into environmental studies, ecology, like just understanding that from a very different perspective. So I spent a lot of time talking about this with him, talking about its implications with him. And so I think those conversations opened up a lot for me. A lot of the books that he recommended, also books like One Straw Revolution by Masamudu Fukuoka, which is an all-time favorite, which kind of opened up completely new dimensions of thinking, which I hadn't really paid attention to earlier. So I think this happened, and happened to bump into people who were talking about Advaita, and so went for some conversations with them. That opened up a whole other dimension for me. So if I look at ecology as a more worldly kind of, in a more worldly way, that it talks about the world that I live in, this kind of talks about the larger universe and the meaning of life and all of that. So at both these levels, there were like very deep conversations that were happening, a lot of introspection and thinking, reflection that was happening. So I think, yeah, that's the spirit that's been carrying on so far, serendipitously, happening across things, books, resources, people that, open up new directions for me to explore from time to time.
So, Vinod, so while you were sharing, I was also thinking about, so you walked out of college, right?
I did.
And what were you thinking at that time when you did that?
Okay, so I'm not sure I was thinking anything at the time except like, I need to get away from my exams. But really, I think the deeper meaning was, or the deeper, thing that was churning that was going on inside was that I was not happy with the way I was learning anything. So I did 2 years of science. So this was like a very typical thing back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, that science was looked at as the career path that intelligent people took, and commerce was second. And then for arts was considered to be the lowest form, or like, if you didn't get enough marks and things like that, you would take that up. So thinking back, I feel I would have been much more suited to learning something in the arts and the humanities, because that was the way I was kind of, that's the kind of person I am. But I came under that peer pressure. I took up science. I took up 2 years of science first. And then after 2 years, I realized it wasn't making me happy at all, just the way it was taught. And there was this, even if I was able to just learn it completely, it would have been a very different experience. But there was this whole pressure to do well in exams and your 10th standard, 12th standard. The whole idea was how are you going to get into a particular stream later? And that didn't work for me. That just didn't work for me. For me, it's like right here is something I'm studying, but we're not paying attention to that. We're not going into it. We're entirely focused on marks and career path and all of that. I'm not able to enjoy what I'm doing right here. So I walked out of science. I told my family, this is not really working for me. I'd like to switch over to doing commerce. So even then, there was this hesitancy to take up the humanities and arts, which probably would have suited me better. Anyway, I ended up taking up commerce. The only advantage it gave me was we had only 3 hours of college in the morning, from I think 7 in the morning to about 9:30, 10 in the morning. And it left the rest of the day free for me to do whatever else I wanted. So I did exactly that. I would land up in college, and probably like my college was also designed very interestingly, where if you entered the college, on the left side was the whole college building, and on the right side at the basement was a canteen. And I found myself inevitably taking that path, going to the canteen and spending time there with friends, just hanging around, chatting and all that. And if threatened by the college that, oh, you are missing classes and you're going to be on the blacklist and all that, I would show up a few times. But pretty much that was my 3 years of commerce education. But the rest of the time, when I got the whole day to myself, I would come back home and practice music. So I was able to convince my parents that I was very interested in learning to play the keyboards. And thankfully, like, they were very understanding about it, because I had been playing for a few years before that. And, so they did support me with that. So I had a keyboard at home. I would sit and play for 8 to 10 hours every day. So I think like that was also a beautiful time, because it was a lot of time spent with myself and, like going within, because it wasn't like outwardly focused as much. So, yeah. So, and yeah, so that's the path. And, finally I decided this was not working for me. So I walked out of commerce as well and said, I'd rather do self-directed learning. Like, I'm just going to pick something that I'm interested in and learn about that in any way that I want to learn, and not worry about how it's being taught.
That's beautiful. Yeah. That's beautiful, Vinod. Yeah, it takes a very different kind of context, and at the same time, a different kind of heart to kind of keep doing that. So I think one question that I have is that you play art, you do art, you do photography, you also do carpentry sometimes, and which involves a lot of hands work. And at one level, there's this one part of you which does a lot of reading, a lot of conversations, there's breaking down of concepts that happens, and there is another part of you that goes out into nature, and at the same time there's a kind of works with all different senses. And I was just wondering that how does it influence your thinking and your approach to life, this working with the hands and playing of music and all of that, right? How does that inform your way of being?
I think that's once again a very beautiful question. And you're right, I do spend a lot of my time reading and thinking of ideas and concepts, like immersing myself in that. Also a wide range of reading. So because I'm interested in quite a lot of different subjects, I do read about politics, I read about history, I read about ecology, I read about science. So there's always like, some thoughts going on in my mind all the time. So I don't think I stop thinking. And all of these other activities that you spoke about, whether it's music or woodworking or photography or art, these are things that enable me, which take me out of my thinking mind for a bit and enable me to just be, to be attentive, to be present to the moment. So like when I'm playing music, I cannot be thinking about, forget about the books that I'm reading or the ideas that are floating around in my mind. I can't even think about the next note. I need to do justice to the note that I'm playing right now, singing right now. So I need to be 100% present to this moment and whatever it contains. And then when the next moment comes and carries with it whatever, I need to do justice to that. So I think doing this, whether it's photography, woodworking is also something which is very, you have to be present. So you cannot do it with an absent-minded attitude because you might end up hurting yourself. So you need to be very precise. You need to be, there's a lot of mechanical movement involved. With music too, if you're practicing your scales and things like that, it's very mechanical, some part of it. Like you're really like paying 100% attention to it and bringing your attention inward. So I think that really helps me to also let these ideas settle in and kind of gestate for a period of time. And a lot of times I realize that it's not my thinking that gives rise to new ideas or solutions or ways forward. It's the silence. It's the time that I spend in doing these other things, where these ideas are churning around in their own way, and then lateral connections are formed on their own. And really, they pop up in my mind as an epiphany or as a fully formed thought. And I know I'm not responsible for it. It's not something I've created. It's something that I may be a medium through which that particular idea is expressed. And so I've had it happen to me so many times that I no longer can claim credit for some of these ideas. I just know that what I need to do is be silent. And in a way, that's my own form of meditation, even if I'm not sitting down to meditate, but act like an active form of meditation. And that's really what helps me with the other work that I do. I hope that answers the question.
That's beautiful, Vinod. Yeah, definitely. It kind of not only answers, but it kind of brings us home, in that sense. And I was, you have also been kind of in some ways, like you shared about in our previous conversations, you've shared about your connection with the book "I Am That" by Nisargadatta Maharaj, and somewhere he kind of talks about that one source, and I was wondering that how like when you do this, do you connect with that source, and then kind of do you come back and in some ways make sense of the world outside? How does that happen for you?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting point, because in the way that we live our lives naturally, it's quite common for our attention to be drawn away, by a multitude of things. There's just so much happening, whether it's within yourself or to yourself, or around you, to your family and friends, or in your work. This is the most common experience that people have, that we are drawn away. Every minute of every day is drawn away outward. And so it really helps me to remember this message, this kind of very fundamental message by Nisargadatta Maharaj, that you are the source of everything, and there is only one source of everything. So you need to remember that and not get caught up and swept away by what the world's diversity and multiplicity is, which it's natural tendency to do. So I keep coming back to that book just to remind myself that, okay, this is really what it's all about, and to me, like what I've also seen in the book, seen from his talks as well, is that it doesn't matter who's asking the questions, to Nisargadatta, for example. It might be somebody who's very, very well educated, very well read in philosophy, who's studied the world's religions and all of that. Or on the other hand, it might be just a simple, a person who's just going about his life and trying to live with his family and make sure his family is comfortable. Maybe one of his neighbors from this neighborhood in Bombay. And it doesn't matter who's asking the question, because either time or each time, Mr. Vidata answers with the same steadfastness. And it's not just, it's not, I wouldn't even say steadfastness, that's one part of it, but it's the clarity of knowing something from experience. He just speaks from there. And that kind of, permeates through any conversation that he has with anybody. And I'd like to bring that into the work that I do as well, to remember that while my eyes might deceive me and tell me that there's so much going on and, all of this is happening, I must remember that underneath all this multiplicity of things, all the myriad things that are happening, there's always going to be something, which holds all that. So it's a very simple idea. I'd again read this in a very beautiful book, that for any kind of duality to exist, there has to be unity which contains that duality. So for any two things to exist, there has to be something greater than both of them that contains the two of them, right? So you and I, for example, if you're sitting in a room, the room is bigger than both of us. And that room and another room are contained in a house, which is bigger than both the rooms together, and so on. So the basic principle is that for any kind of dualities to exist, there has to be something unifying both of them. And I would rather try and find a way to be connected to that unity, rather than paying attention to the duality or each aspect of duality. So that's a necessity for our life. I mean, we need to also engage with the world, but if that engagement is informed by this understanding or this experience that, there is unity underlying all of this, and we are all connected by that unity, then it makes for a far better experience, beautiful experience, I would say.
Yeah. So Vinod, you know what? This is so beautiful, and I think at one level, I would, so I want to surprise you over here a little bit, okay. And I want to, share a video. This is somebody whom I think you will recognize, and I will ask a follow-up question post that.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So do let me know if you can listen. I'm just working on my technology skills. So, and see the video. Yeah, just give me a heads up.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, just a moment.
Patience, perseverance, Dalai Lama's cat, though in real life he is allergic to cats. Humanitarian, educator, traveler, a learner, speaker, so many different facets of Mr. Vinod Sreedhar. I know Vinod for a very long time, since childhood. We've been brought up together in a joint family, and he's touched my life in many ways that are undescribable. Thanks to him that today I've been able to embark on a journey of an environmentalist and an eco-traveler. He's also mentored me and also been a great listener, especially in times when things were not really going great for me. I admire Vinod, and I look up to him for the way for his thought process, for the way he, brings out his humanitarian aspects and thinks about changing the world in ways that will really impact the planet in coming futures.
That definitely did take me by surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that's your cousin Ajay, and who has been deeply touched by just your presence in his life. And from what you shared in your earlier, remarks, like what you were sharing earlier about, you know, like, both of us are having this conversation, but this room contains this conversation. And you've been holding beautiful spaces for young people, for a lot of people, in your life. And you've also been in places of conflict. Like you've been in places like Kashmir, you've been in places where people have been like, it's been difficult. And you've been able to, create this space over there as well. And you were in Kashmir, I think, in 2002 when the Gujarat riots happened. And it was a pretty intense situation. And you were there, in the middle of curfew. And so I think my question is that, we can think about this when, our minds are quiet, when we are not threatened. But in the face of fear, in the face of anger, what kind of informed this practice of yours, or what kind of allowed you to, be in that sense, or kind of created spaces for conversation? Because I think you were able to create those spaces for conversation. And if you can also, take us through that journey, that story of Kashmir.
Yeah, so I mean, earlier I mentioned that a lot of what I've done, a lot of the experiences that I've had have just come up organically, and not something I've sought out or looked for. And the Kashmir experience was one of those kinds of experiences for me. That I was part of an NGO called Association of Youth for a Better India in Bombay in the year 2000, and when I was asked to propose a project. I mean, all of us were asked to propose some projects to work on, and like a bunch of us were talking about the Kashmir conflict, and we said, okay, like this whole India Pak issue is also a big thing, so let's work on that, and let's try and create some awareness about it. So we were all pretty young at that time, and we took that up. Like we would do some street plays in Bombay and get people to start at least talking about these issues. And so because of that work that we were doing, we were invited to be part of an Indo-Pak Peace Conference in Panchkani at the Initiatives of Change campus. So we ended up going there, and we met a lot of people from India, Pakistan, and Kashmir who were invited to be part of this conference. And I found myself sharing a room with 3 Kashmiri boys, a little younger than me, but we were all kind of more or less the same age and kind of having the same kind of excuse me, the life experience. So they put us together for some reason, and I don't remember sleeping much. We would end up sitting up to 4, 5 a.m. just talking about things. They had a lot of questions for me. I had a ton of questions for them about their life in Kashmir. And I realized I didn't know much at all. But I also realized I had a lot of, I was carrying some very strong opinions, which were probably not based in any sort of real life experience. So it was to do with a lot of the reading that I was doing, mainstream media. And so following that, I was in touch with these friends of mine in Kashmir, and they invited me to join in for a conference in Jammu, which was a faith-based conference. They said that, okay, we're going to be, it's a conference where someone is facilitating, people coming in from the Semitic religion. So Muslims, Christians, and Jews would be essentially part of that conference, but they wanted some the people from non-Semitic religions to be there as observers. And as a Hindu, I was invited to be there. So I went there for this conference, and it was, of course, a very beautiful experience just being there and listening to all these stories, and just watching a process of people coming together to move past their barriers and all of that. But at the end of that conference, my friends from Kashmir invited me to come there, and they said, "You're already here. It's only 300 kilometers away. So what better time to join us? Just come." So on the spur of the moment, I said, "Okay, I am going to join you." And this was at a time when we couldn't inform, phones weren't working very well in Jammu Kashmir, so I couldn't call my parents and tell them I'm going there. So all they knew was that I was in Jammu, but I suddenly landed up in Srinagar with these friends, and happened to spend about 10, 12 days there with them, stayed there, walked around, just met people. So the most vivid memory I have is on day one, we reached over there, and the second day, I think we were walking around and happened to bump into a friend of a friend. So I was staying with his friend Abid and Gauhar, 2 friends, and happened to kind of bump into one of their friends. And he said, "Acha, aap India se aaye hain, you've come from India." And my instant, reaction was outrage, because I felt like, how is this person dividing these two places? Because as far as I know, Kashmir is also very much a part of India. And so I somehow managed to mutter something, mumble something, but inside I was, seething and angry. And so I went back feeling quite a lot of turmoil that day to Abid's house. And when I was there, coincidentally, I happened to be carrying a book by Shashi Tharoor called India from Midnight to the Millennium. And this was a book I just started reading. I hadn't made much progress on it. But that night, because of all this churning, I decided to read, and happened to come across a chapter on identity, where he talks about how we're all made up of so many different identities simultaneously. So he spoke about himself as being a Malayali, a South Indian, Saint Stephanian, someone who's grown up in Kolkata, and so many other things, as an Indian, of course, as a Hindu. So a lot of these identities, of course, were very important parts of his being. And he asked one important question about, why should any one of these identities take precedence over my life? And if I am living my life, based on that identity, then is it something I've adopted intentionally, or is it something that's been handed down to me and I've just, taken it blindly? And that hit me very hard, because the first thing that struck me was that the reason I was so angry that day is because I was listening to this boy as an Indian. That was, of course, one of my strong identities. But what would happen if I could let that go for a moment and listen to him as a world citizen, or just as a fellow human being? Because that also is one of my identities. And that epiphany really hit home. And something shifted inside me. And the next day, when I started going around again, meeting people, I received this question a bunch of times from others as well. And what happened is, I no longer felt a need to defend my identity of being Indian. I said, okay, put that aside. It's a fellow human being talking to me and asking me a question. And I was able to respond from a very, very different space, one of quietness, one of being non-threatening, because I didn't feel threatened, and I definitely didn't want to feel, make them feel threatened. And just that little space opening up allowed me to have very beautiful conversations with those people. And they, of course, as a representative of India, they weren't meeting too many other Indians at that time. It was either soldiers of India who would, be, posted all over Kashmir, pointing guns at them, or it would be people like me, the occasional Indian who might land up, because this was at a time, we must remember, it wasn't the time when tourism was happening. So Srinagar was under curfew for 20 to 21 hours every day, and it would open only for 3 hours a day, where you could go out and do your work. So there wasn't any tourism. So, very few Indians would come there, or people from other parts of India would come there. And so it was interesting for them also to meet me and be able to share with me what they were feeling. A lot of what they were feeling was anger. And they would, throw it out at me. And because I was able to just listen, not as an Indian and not defend anything, they would exhaust their anger after a few minutes and then realize, okay, we could talk about other things. And then the conversations would open up into, many more beautiful subjects, including just how we could connect with each other, how beautiful things that we could share with each other. So to me, like, that was a very, very powerful epiphany and awakening, which is, I feel that it's informed my work until today. That that's at the core of the work that I do, is that how do we get past these disconnects that we, otherwise experience almost every single day. Yeah. And yeah, some of my closest friends, even today, even though we don't get to meet as often, but when we do meet, we know we're connected at a deeper level and not superficially.
I think a lot of people have to say that about you. We've got a lot of material on, back end material, and we might not be able to show all of that, but to just let you know that there are so many people who are very grateful for this space that you create. This kind of deep listening space that you create, and it's very true. I think a lot of them also said that they've not been in touch with you for years, but they feel that they can reach out to you any moment. And I think that happens when this connection happens, where there is no self-interest in that sense, and you create that space. Vinod, I think one of the questions which I was, which kind of comes up for me often, when we are looking at this, is while we are looking at honoring diversity, and diversity being so important. And I think even in your journeys, when you take people, they're introduced to a lot of different cultures and indigenous communities, indigenous cultures. But what are some of the challenges of diversity? I think you've as a, I think one of the things, if you look at the journey of the salmon fish, the salmon fish starts its journey from the river and it moves towards the sea. And in the sea, it eats certain kind of food which has certain kind of minerals, and then it kind of flows back into the river. And that fish is eaten by the bears, by the brown bears, and the brown bears go and defecate out in the forest, and those minerals go into the soil, and that, that goes back into the tree, and when the tree falls back into the river, it kind of the small fishes feed out of it, which the salmon fish again, so it's like the whole circle kind of comes into being over there. And so one is, as humans, do we have a collective niche? If we do have that, right? And there is a lot of honoring of that diversity, and understanding what that collective niche is, and seeing that how do we kind of work from between this whole game between autonomy and diversity, and all of that. So what does it really, what does diversity really mean, and how, and what are the challenges?
Thank you. That's a very thought-provoking question. So, yeah. So to me, I used the word disconnects a couple of minutes ago when I said that that's one of the things that we try to bridge. And so I'd like to start with that. That when there is diversity, there are also disconnects, because you can't always connect with everybody and everything in the exact same ways. And so on the one hand, I feel as somebody who's very deeply interested in ecology, I feel like diversity is absolutely vital. Without that, we wouldn't have stability on the planet. So diversity is the bedrock of stability, in the sense that it's not a stagnant kind of stability. It's a very dynamic kind of stability. So I would liken it to a dance with 100 people dancing together, but everybody's holding hands, and it's like a very, like a group of people that are holding hands and dancing, not in a circle, but in all sorts of ways that hands and limbs are intertwined. And that dance is what's going on. And there is a bit of push and pull, at different parts, but it's the strength of everybody holding each other in very different ways and diverse ways that gives that group stability. So I liken it to like our universe, and our world to be like that as well, that there's so much going on beneath the surface, behind what we can see. So that diversity is absolutely crucial to the, to the planet existing as it is, and for its existence and running, everyday running. That, of course, naturally gives rise to a whole host of challenges as well, because diversity also leads to the inability to see other people's way of life as, perfectly fine for them or right in their own ways. And to also look at everything through our own lenses and not be able to see that there could be multiple lenses through which we view the world and understand it. So I think a lot of the work that I've been doing is to try and balance that sense of autonomy and the sense of stability or diversity that we have talked about. That on the one hand, you want to have the freedom to live your life the way you want to live, but that can only happen if you allow that same freedom, or not allow it, to actually support it actively, to help other people find their own ways of living and their own freedom, even if that looks radically different from how you might be living. So to hold that basic kind of, contradiction in your mind, that my way of life is right for me, and I cannot impose it on other people, whether it's other cultures or nature, right? And to be able to move past that and help them live the best life that they possibly can, and live the life that is right for them. So it's always this constant kind of, flowing between these two that informs the life I live and the way I work as well. So whether it's journeys with meaning, where we bridge disconnects, 3 or 4 different kinds of disconnects. We talk about the disconnect between humans and nature, and particularly urban humans and nature. Like, people living in villages are still surrounded by nature to a much larger extent, but people in cities don't have that. And therefore, there's a huge disconnect between them understanding nature. Then there's a disconnect between different human cultures itself. So, I always give this example of how I'm more connected with somebody living in London or New York, in language, in the kind of cultural experiences that we have. Like, I can talk to them about sitcoms and things like that very easily, or in the way I dress up even. But I don't share that with my fellow Indians, like a Khasi villager in Meghalaya or a Ladakhi in a remote village in Ladakh. And so there's that disconnect between human cultures as well that we need to kind of find a way around, while respecting each other's diversity, but also to find that connecting factor. And there's a disconnect between head and heart. Like, we live so much from the head these days and not enough from the heart. So to be able to do that as well. And the final disconnect is between our actions and their consequences. We act in certain ways. We can't see the consequences because it happens to other people in distant places at a different time. And to be able to, pull back and see that, okay, this is how my actions affect other people. So to see that big picture. So, to me, like, that's really what understanding diversity is all about. That how are these things going to get affected? But also carrying that idea that we need to protect that diversity, and we need to kind of make sure that it continues, unhindered. So, and yet your limited circle of influence is where your autonomy lies, what you can do, right? The actions that you can take and how that's going to impact other people is where you can actually make some changes. So hope that kind of, addresses the question that you had.
Yeah, I mean, not only addresses, it opens up a lot of thought processes. It opens up, ways to think more. And I was wondering that, how do you kind of enable this in journeys with meaning? If you can share a story, or, if how do you work around it? If you have any kind of, principles that you kind of, that allows for this to happen.
Absolutely. I think there's so many stories from each of our trips, but yeah, like a couple of them stand out, and really the stories are very simple. So, for example, even something like visiting the tree, the Amashukpa tree that you shared a photograph of earlier. Now, that's a great way to connect people with a much older part of the earth and older part of themselves, saying that, people before you have taken care of this tree for centuries, for millennia, forget centuries. And that's why you're able to stand here and look at this tree, and not just look at it, you can actually go up to it and hug it and speak to the tree. So to me, that's a very powerful moment that, it reminds us of the need for making sure that the way we live our lives is very important, because we should not be cutting down trees. We should not be decimating our own history and our own heritage. And I can either talk about that, or I can just take them to this tree and say, listen, this is 2000 plus years old. Let's go sit under it and talk a while about other things. But always keeping in mind that this tree is here because people before us protected it and let it live and didn't cut it down. And can we do the same for generations after us? What are we leaving behind for them? So that's a very simple story of connecting with Earth. Connecting with other cultures, we often find differences in the way people live. Of course, very fascinating. When we go to Meghalaya, for example, we look at the way they live, the kind of foods they eat, and all of that. But at the end of the day, we also connect on very basic ideas. Like, they go through a lot of challenges living in those areas, and we look at the kind of ideas that they've come up with. So I look at education, and I talk to them saying that city people are very highly educated, many of us, and we think we know more than others. But these other people, these simple villagers living here, decided at one point that they needed to build bridges across the torrential streams. The monsoons, it's raging. And if they had to cross the valley and go to the other side, they obviously couldn't swim across. And they had to build bridges. But how do you carry, material from, say, 3 kilometers up down into the valley? And so what they did is they actually came up with living root bridges, where they would plant, the trees on either side of the river, and then let it grow through bamboo. They would put bamboo shoots and let the roots grow through that. And over 30 to 40 years, the bridge would grow. and one day the bamboos would just break apart and fall over, and the bridge is ready, and they could use the bridge to walk across. And these bridges are the only ones in the world where they don't start deteriorating the day after they're built. They get stronger over time. And I've walked over bridges which are 200 years old and which can hold 50 people at a time with not a single nail in it. It's just the tree growing over the river. That's all there is to it. But now, is that not wisdom? Is that not intelligence? So to also be able to see that intelligence can take varying forms, different shapes and forms, and if people are able to solve their very practical problems in a way which doesn't cause harm to nature, it's absolutely worth learning from. So these are the stories that inform a lot of the lessons that we talk about in life. Just these experiences of spending time with these people.
Beautiful. I think I want to show something over here. Okay, these are the living root bridges Vinod was just talking about. I thought I would like to show it to our audience. And I think this is a double-decker bridge, isn't it?
Yeah. So not only did this community build living root bridges across the river, they built a double-decker one for fun. So this is the one where I'm saying 50 people can actually stand on this bridge, and you can see that it doesn't have any pillars or any other support. It just, it's just the roots of the trees. You can see one tree over here, and likewise there's another tree on the other end, and they're super strong. We've had people trying to hang from them and trying to see if they budge, but nothing happens. Really strong. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you, Vinod, for bringing this up. It's I mean, these are some wisdom. This is some wisdom which is quite interesting in today's times when we are trying to interlink rivers or kind of break through mountains and build highways over there, and do all those kind of things. And if we look at why are we trying to do this, for example, these people want to travel from one end of the village to another end of the village, and here is a beautiful indigenous solution which is available. And then we have this whole different way of thinking and of different world out there, and which is kind of the dominant world in that sense. And like what the work you do, and this kind of wisdom that you tap into is is very uncommon in that sense. And how kind of in that sense, how do you kind of reconcile, or how do you make sense of the way the world is going towards? Because there is a huge energy out there, which kind of despite seeing, doesn't want to see. And I think one of the things that we talked about earlier was making the invisible visible, and but it's huge out there, and how do you kind of persevere through that, and what's your motivation, and where does it, how do you not get exhausted also?
So I think one of the things that's happened through these journeys and through the work that I've done is to understand that the reason why people in these regions have been able to live very different lives. Like in Ladakh, the Amashukpa that we looked at, which is an ancient tree, they also preserve their culture beautifully. They still live in mud houses. Even the toilets over there do not create any waste. In fact, all the waste becomes manure later on, and there's no water that is wasted in that desert. And likewise, in the Khasi heartland of Meghalaya, they're building these bridges with the materials that are available to them. I think one thing stands out for me, it is the idea that they understand how everything on this planet is interconnected, right? They truly get it. And that is why they have been able to live the way they do. So their actions are designed to not cause harm. They need to, of course, fulfill their requirements, they need to meet their needs, but they do it in a way, or they try to do it in a way which is not causing any harm to people or to the planet. And I think that's one lesson that I've taken away from them and saying that, okay, this is the work that I want to also work. This is what I want to spread. So like you said rightly, there's a whole lot of, there's so much going on around the planet, but almost all of it I can point out is coming from this, lack this understanding that we don't have, that everything is interconnected. We look at the world as being very separate, very discrete, separate fragments. And we only deal with the fragments. We don't deal with the relationships between those fragments or those elements. And so the work that I do is really about how everything on this planet is interconnected at a worldly level. And like we discussed earlier, at a metaphysical level, we are all coming from the same source. So we are all interconnected as well, right? Spiritually speaking. So at both these levels of interconnections are what we're looking at, then I feel like what I can do really is to offer people an experience of that interconnectedness. And experience speaks, much more than words. So I can, of course, talk to people. I can do that work as well. But when I take people to these places and get them to experience these things, I realize I don't need to speak as much. The experience, brings something alive in them, and it raises questions. It challenges their own way of thinking. And all I need to do is be present as a facilitator to, help them navigate that churning that they're going through. So that's really the work that I have to do, create a space where people can have these experiences. And I've seen people shifting. I've seen people's minds shifting, their thinking shifting, their action shifting. So which is why I don't get bored by it. I don't get tired of it or exhausted by it, because I feel like if we can just find a way to get more people to experience these things, they'll change on their own. You don't need to police them. You don't need to impose anything on them. Give them those experiences or allow them to have that experience in whatever ways they can. So yeah, so that's how I feel like I'm able to continue with every generation of kids that I take on these. We work with schools, so when we take school kids out to the Sundarbans, for example, and we make them do projects on this. We take them to the river bank and we say, okay, like there's a whole lot of flooding that happens in Sundarbans. Now, if you were to be given funds and time to solve these problems, how would you do it? So go out, interview people around, go talk to the villagers around to see what are the problems they're facing. And then come and design solutions based on systems thinking, which is like the systems thinking is really a way to understand how everything is interconnected and to see the invisible, because otherwise when we just look out, we see the apparent causes of problems. This causes that, but really when you look at it from a bird's eye view, you realize, no, this is not causing that. There are some other things happening before or in some other place which are actually leading to these problems. So we teach children how to do that, and they come up with beautiful solutions as well. So I think like that's what that is. When I see that happening, I realize that okay, I just need to plant these seeds and water them a little bit. They will grow up into very strong trees on their own. And that's really what it's all about.
So I think at one level there is this externally where they see that we are all interconnected, and then there is the spiritual seeing of being interconnected. And have you had experiences of kind of kids or youth who have been on these journeys, who've kind of because nature at some level, the way it is, things are kind of depleting at a pretty fast rate. I think you might have experienced that in your travels as well. What Ladakh was 20 years ago and what Ladakh is now, there is a huge difference. And the rate of change earlier was maybe 10 years, and now it's not even that. It's 6 months to 1 year to 2 years. And so with that, with that resource kind of going away, how do you kind of stay rooted, and how do you kind of work through that?
I think so. The interesting part of doing these journeys is that we are equally able to engage with our friends in these places and not just with the groups that we take. So it's a two-way exchange process, I would say, that during those conversations, one of the things that we also talk about is that with our Ladakhi friends, for example, that you see us coming here with a whole lot of, like you see a different world. you see people coming with gadgets and cell phones and cameras and laptops and things like that. But that's only half the story. You don't see what they've paid, the price they've paid to get those things. And so it's very interesting that it's like advertising. The tourism only shows half the picture. It doesn't tell the whole story. And what we try and do is try and show them the other side of the picture, that sure, we have all these things, but then we've paid the price of not being able to hear, listen to birds first thing in the morning, or being able to go for a walk in a quiet field, and clean water, forget about it. So, we just don't have that. Whereas right here in Ladakh, I can go to the back of the field, and there's a beautiful stream flowing by where I can just take a sip of glacial water. So when we talk about these things, I think they also realize that they have something left to preserve. And it's, equally, it's as important for them to do that work of preserving it. And that's why we are also there to help them in whatever ways we can. We don't have the answers necessarily, but we can give support. And that's the idea, that by taking groups of people there, so we support them in two ways. One is we volunteer there in whatever ways we can. And once we go back, the idea is that these ideas should stick around in, in our group's minds, that they go back and change the way they live, and also talk to their parents about how they live and what they can do. So hopefully that is a larger, system of change that would be happening over time. And if there was, I feel like if we've been able to convince even a few people to just change the way they live and consume less and be more mindful of how they live on the planet, that's something that I would be very happy about. And yeah, once again, these are things you don't know how they're going to play out in the future. So our job is to just give people that experience and then see how it blossoms and how it kind of pans out in the end.
Yeah, I think it's over a period of time, it's like some seeds, they take maybe 100 years to sprout, but they will sprout. Some seeds need fire, to sprout. So we don't know what conditions will allow for that sprouting to happen, but they will sprout. And I think that's inspiring to see that, especially in times when the media out there and, the kind of news we get are quite depressing in that sense. But, within that, when this work is happening and the core of it is really planting seeds for maybe 2,500 years or, the next 5,000 years. And that is very reassuring and hopeful to look at, and especially the values, and so before I go into my next question, I have to do a public services announcement. Yeah. So for all of you who have questions, please you can type. You can email us at askask@servicebase.org, or you could also type in the live cast form, just below the screen where you're seeing this video, and we'll get those questions and we will check them out to Vinod. All right. So with that, Vinod, I think the next question is on values. That you've been traveling so much, you've been going to you've been part of so many different cultures. You've been exposed to so many different cultures. What are some values that have deeply touched and informed your life? With all the interactions that you've had, and how have you been able to kind of integrate them in your life? In your practices.
Again, so many different stories that I can share. But a couple of them I'd like to share here is that one is, but it's again rooted in Kashmir. The region has been going through so much turmoil over the last 30, 35 years. And it's something that, scares a lot of people. People don't travel there because they're worried about what might happen to them. But in the 2014 floods, there were these really big floods in Kashmir in 2014. And my partner Neha, she got stuck over there. So we were actually supposed to meet in Srinagar and go for a recce visit to Kargil. And so I was just finishing a trip in Ladakh, and we said, okay, let's meet midway in Kargil and then go from there. So the day she arrived in Srinagar, the flood started happening, and the highway was shut down because of some landslide, and she was stuck there for 9 days. And she was staying with a friend of mine, but his house got flooded, so he moved her to his in-laws' place. These are people she has never met and I have never met. But over those 9 days, the way she was treated over there, by the family, was astounding. Just the generosity of spirit, and they didn't have enough food for themselves because everything was closed. And when they would get some apples, to feed the children, they would also. There were 6 kids at home, staying at home that day, at that time, and they would cut these apples and give her a few pieces as well, even though they themselves wouldn't eat any, right? And this is, of course, just that one family I'm talking about. But I heard so many stories and I saw it firsthand, where travelers who were stranded in Kashmir because of the floods were told by the houseboat owners that, listen, the transactional part of it is done. You paid us and you finished your holiday, and now you're stuck here. It's a disaster. So you can stay as long as you want, and you don't have to worry about paying us a thing. Whatever food we cook for ourselves, we'll also be serving you, and stay here. Don't worry. Until the flood subsides, you can stay here with us. And there are thousands of such stories, right? That the kind of generosity of spirit. One story I remember is when I was driving from Leh to Srinagar to meet Neha and to pick her up from there. I had to take a share taxi, and the share taxi was already full. We were like 8 people in that, the driver, 2 people in front, 4 in the middle, and I think 4 in the back. So they were like, already it was a very full vehicle, a Tata Sumo. And somewhere about 50 or 100 kilometers outside of Srinagar, we were flagged down by somebody. And he said, listen, I have this German lady who's been stuck here for 2 weeks, and she needs to get out of, her flight is from Delhi, so she needs to get out of here. Please take her with you to Leh, where she can, fly out to Delhi. And the whole group protested, saying, no, there's no space, we can't do this. And the driver said, nothing doing. She's our guest, and we have to help her out in this time of trouble. So he actually fashioned a seat for her by tying a rope around the bucket seats in front. It could actually seat only 2 people, but 3 people were already sitting there. The one bucket seat contained 2 people, and the other had the driver. So he tied a rope around the whole thing and put a blanket on it so that she could rest her back. And he made her sit next to him with her legs on either side of the gear shift. And he drove like that for 500 kilometers over the Himalayan mountains, right, at those altitudes. I've seen this firsthand. And, guess what he charged? Only for fuel. In a city like Bombay, for example, if it rains and it floods, taxi drivers start charging much more. Rates shoot up. But here he only charged for fuel. So that's a value of generosity of spirit, that despite not getting along with India, they've always told me that we don't have a problem with Indians. We have a problem with India, the state. You're welcome all the time here, anytime, and we'll treat you with as much respect as we can. So that's one very, very powerful story of the generosity of spirit. That's a value that I have had the privilege of experiencing a bunch of times, and something I would like to also hopefully be able to share with others. Right. So that's, yeah, and the Ladakhi ability to take everything in stride. They live in such a difficult region. It's winter for 8 months of the year. Everything they do has to be done in the summertime, 4 months where they grow all their food and stock it up for the rest of the year. And, but to have a smile on their faces, to welcome anybody. And they have this beautiful all-purpose word called Julle, which is like a hello, but it could also mean a how are you? And for younger people, what's up, dude? And also thank you and goodbye. So this is something that we, all our groups say when they come back from Ladakh, is that we find it difficult to stop saying Julle to perfect strangers on the road, because in Ladakh, that's a very common thing. You just like anybody you pass, you just wave out at them and say Julle, with a big smile. So people like to do that back in the city, and they get these stares from, some suspicious stranger. Like, what exactly are you saying? But that's a value, that just that, acceptance of life in all its colors and forms. Doesn't matter how challenging it is, but they have this beautiful smile on their face while they live that life. Yeah, the 2 values that I've definitely taken forward.
Wow. It's, this whole spirit of generosity that you just shared, it is, it just feels so natural and human. when we experience it, but somewhere forgotten, and thank you for bringing these stories to us. It kind of, through you, we are kind of like, I am kind of, reminded of that generosity when I have experienced it traveling in villages. And it has just become alive for me right now in this moment. And Vinod, you have you've experimented a lot in gift economy also. Like in fact, you have kind of never for the first 5 years of JWM, you never charged anything for yourself. You would just keep a box out, and people would pay whatever they would want to pay, and nothing. Then that's also fine. And I've seen you live through that with a lot of joy. And you keep and I was just reading one of your articles where you talk about gift economy and in Bhumi. You've written that article for Bhumi magazine, and one thing that you talk about over there is nishkam karma. And it's something which is deeper than it sounds. And you've been trying to integrate that into the work that you do. Also, there is a phrase in the Gita which is swadharma, that you find the calling of your heart and you walk that path, and then you do that work with nishkam seva, which is selflessness. And at the same time, you are planted in the world where there is transaction right now, and you kind of are balancing that out. So if you can share with us, that what for you, what does it really mean, like gift, what does gift really mean for you? And what is when you offer with that spirit of generosity, like how are you balancing it?
I think, so yeah, you're absolutely right in saying that the years where I lived the gift economy model completely were among the most joyful years of my life, in the sense that I felt very supported by not just the family and friends around, but also the world itself. I've shared stories in some of these articles about how, when I needed certain things in my life, they just showed up. I've shared with you about needing a flip camera to document our journeys, and very serendipitously a friend, Chandni, she just we met for coffee or something like that, and she said, listen, I've participated in some competition, and the first prize is a flip camera, so I don't have any need for one. If I win it, I'm going to give it to you. And this was at a time when I had not shared it with anybody, and definitely not with her. And within a week, I had the flip camera with me. This is just one story. I've had so many different experiences of just things happening. Like when I wanted to learn facilitation, I decided at some point, this thought popped up in my morning pages that I do, that maybe like what you should be doing, the work you should be doing is to be a facilitator. And this was in the year 2005. And within the next few days, I received 2 emails from 2 different organizations that I'd worked with in the past, not organizations that I'd been currently working with. That I'd already finished working with them. And they reached out to me saying that we feel that you should go for this facilitation training program. And it's an all expenses covered thing. Like, we'll cover all your expenses, but we just want you to do this. Now, again, hadn't been in touch with them, hadn't talked about it, but my requirement was met. So I feel like that has happened a lot, and that continues to happen even today. That when I feel that, okay, this is some work that I need to do, and I put it out there, the world has found a way to, make it happen for me in some way or the other. And in terms of the gift economy model, I did from 2008 to 2013, I did it 100%, where all the work that I did was offered as a gift to people, and they would cover their own costs and things like that. But at the end of the trip, I would just leave out a box and say that, if you want to support my work, if you think I need to do more of this, then feel free to put whatever you want into that box. Feel free to take out also, it doesn't matter. Or if you feel you can support me in other ways, again, through just connecting me with people or buying me a cup of coffee, anything is welcome. There are no parameters for that. And it was beautiful. I was able to do that very beautifully for 5 years. But there was a time when my father fell very seriously ill and he needed a lot of medical attention. So we ended up spending a lot of the the savings that we had and all of that on this thing. And I realized I didn't want to put my parents through that worry. So of not being sure at all about how we could sustain ourselves. So at that point in 2013, I moved to a more conventional model. But along with that conventional model, I also carried forward some part of the gift economy model with me. So what we do is, even if we are charging for a trip, say for 10 people on a trip, as long as we get 10 people who are paying the cost of the trip, then we can take 3 or 4 more people either at cost or for free in whatever way we can support. And what we've done is we've told people that you don't, if you want to help us out on the trip, you can do that. So you can support us by just say, an experience I remember, a story I remember is Tashi, our Ladakhi friend and guide. He leads our treks in Ladakh. So when he said, Vinod, I want to visit Meghalaya, I've never been to a green place, and I want to visit with you if you can manage that. I said, come. So we took him to Meghalaya and I said, okay, you can help me by leading a trek there. So, I get some hours off and you can lead a trek and we'll support you on the trip. You can just join us. So things like that. And, other people are also, have been willing to support. So we've had students who can't afford it, have their expenses covered by other families. And those other families have been very generous to support the journey of some other child, saying that, okay, this child needs to go through this experience. So that's something we've managed to do successfully over the last 10 years of while working on a conventional pricing model. We also have the gift economy model, whether it's a workshop we offer or a trip we offer, where people are supported. If they genuinely are facing a constraint, they should have no reason to miss that experience. So we are able to do that.
So, well, to that, Vinod, we have an audience question. We have a question from Yashpal. Okay. He says, I'm a trifle confused and trying to find answers. Are good acts like you describe an exception, or is it the other way around? That is, by and large, human beings are generous and good, and bad behavior of human beings is the exception. I'm reminded of this quote that says, the more I see of humans, the more I begin to admire my dog. Are you a pessimistic or optimistic about human nature?
Great question, Yashpal.
Great question.
Well, sometimes I agree with that quote that I don't have a dog, but I have a cat. But yeah, we do some days when I read the newspapers or watch the news, I am tempted to think like that. But then I go back and remember all the different experiences I've had with so many different humans across the country and in other places as well, where there's been so much generosity, so much unconditional acceptance that I can't I can't be pessimistic about the human race as a whole. What I believe is there are some people who are misguided or who are able to see only part of the larger picture, and it's not really their fault because that's how the world is structured today. So if those people who were able to see the larger interconnectedness of all life, then they would not be carrying these thoughts. So to me, really the issue is one of ignorance. There's an old quote by the Buddha. I don't know if he actually said it, but I've heard it said that the Buddha said this. To know and to not do is to not know at all. And really, to me, it's really that if these people knew interconnectedness, they would be living that life. So if they're not living it, they do not know it. It's as simple as that. And that's a problem of ignorance, not one of anything else. They're not bad people. But now, so to me, that just makes me more certain that this is the work I need to do more. That how can I show more people about interconnectedness so that they start practicing it and living it in their own lives. And therefore, the ability to be generous is not something that we need to worry about. I think it's natural to all of us. If we can just get past these, other layers that are obscuring our understanding right now. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question. That yeah, I'm not pessimistic about the human race at all.
Yeah. So before we go into our next question, which is another audience question, I would want to show you a video, another surprise video for you. I think you know this person also. So give me a minute.
Yeah, so that's
so
Abhishek, a very, very dear
you-
friend.
Yeah, so that's Abhishek, and he's the founder of the Blue Ribbon Movement, which is inspiring hundreds of youth right now. And there are so many such young people, and we've got so many such stories from so many young people who have been able to walk the path of their heart just by, like, with that nudge and with that space that you created. So with that, we have another audience question. And just give me a second. Yeah. So the question is from Soumya. She's an MBBS doctor, and she says, "What would your advice be for a person who loves ecology and sociology and humanities when they are in another profession, especially when one has to financially depend on oneself and yet explore their interests?" I found a resistance from my parents as they are focused on status and financial security. Can you advise me on something to feel more grounded? While I don't have respect and faith in me from their side, is there a way one can use the model of journeys with meaning to design one's own life?
Again, very interesting question. Thanks for asking that, Soumya. So I don't know if I can advise you, but I can definitely share my own experience with you, which is that I come from a family which was also, which didn't understand the things that I do. In fact, I feel that they still don't understand it to some extent, because it's difficult to describe the work that I do. I also do a bunch of different things. But one thing that has stayed with, that has helped me throughout is to be able to keep talking to parents, keep talking to people around about why you want to do the things you do. And I think one of the biggest fears that family has is to see you unhappy or to see you making the wrong choices. So once again, I don't think they're necessarily coming from the wrong intentions, even though it might look like that. So to be able to understand their fear as well, like what are they afraid of? And to be able to assure them that you will be able to take care of yourself no matter what, and you will be able to also support them in some ways, and you don't have to live a particular kind of lifestyle in order to do that. So one thing I did right from the beginning was to introduce my family to stories of other people, like friends that I was meeting, and talked about them, because then it wasn't about me. So I might talk about, so when I first took up music composing in 1996, it was still very early on, and you didn't have many musicians at all in India at that time. But I happened to bump into Shankar Mahadevan at one place. We knew him through some common contact, and I said, "Listen, he's a tambram like me, and he's an engineer, but he's chosen to walk out of that and take up music composing as a career." Or Ram Sampath, who's another musician, very well-known music composer in India, also a tambram, who's also walked out and done the same thing. So I was able to share these stories with my family, saying that other people are doing it, so there's no reason why I can't, as long as I put in the work for it. And in terms of like your love for ecology and other things, I think it's very much something that you can combine with your career in medicine as well, if that's what you're doing. They're not completely disconnected from each other. There may be ways in which they're separate to some extent, but there are other ways in which they also connect. I'm sure there are many other doctors around the planet who have found a way to combine it, whether it's in terms of like just looking at alternative forms of healing. So I know that this scientific stream kind of looks at certain aspects, but as a doctor, you can also look at other aspects, and you can say that, let me take an interconnected view of the whole thing and not look at it in parts and discrete parts, because modern day medicine does tend to heal, in fragments, not necessarily looking at the whole picture. So maybe you can bring that aspect into it. So that's a way for you to connect your larger interest in ecology with your interest in medicine. And that way your work will also become more fulfilling, hopefully, while being able to support yourself financially and your family as well, if that's required. So hopefully that helps in some way.
So thank you, Vinod. Thank you so much. I think it's been a very nourishing conversation personally for me. Sometimes listening to these stories again, and some of them are so fresh and new, like the the juniper tree story, or the story of generosity, by Kashmiri people. Um, you listen to them, but then they go away from your consciousness, and you've kind of brought them back, and you've brought them back in a very alive way for me. And along with that, I think there is a constant, like what I'm really inspired today is to kind of be, to kind of see that constant perseverance, and with a and it's, and that navigation with deep values, values of interconnection, of generosity, of uh, listening, of silence, of presence, of the disconnects and the connects that you spoke about, the head and the heart and the hand, and the culture and humans, so humans and human cultures, so all of that, right? I think to be able to see that and to weave that into your life and into your work, and kind of making it a stream, has been very, very beautiful, and very, like, I think it holds a certain kind of ground, which allows for other people to kind of now draw from it. I know the Vinod 20 years ago, and I am talking to this Vinod after 20 years, and I think I would have introduced you very differently 20 years ago, and I'm introducing you very differently now, because I think now this has become like a stream from a lot of people who can, draw water from, and it's kind of flowing. So with so much of practice that has gone into who you have become now. So very grateful for that. And I would like to ask you one last question, that how we as Service Space can kind of serve you and serve the work that you're doing. In how can we do that? In what ways can we do that?
Thank you for firstly having me here and being able to have this conversation with Nisha. And in terms of, I think Service Space has already been doing a lot in terms of silently supporting me in so many ways. It's been many years where like we've had this association where crossed paths so many different times and different ways, and I feel like a lot of the amplification of the work that I do that has been done is also by Service Space, just by having these conversations and sharing it with other people. I remember when the gift economy, when I was practicing that, I was, my story was also shared in the Service Space ecosystem. And so like so many other conversations have happened through that, so many people reached out because of that. So I think like that's work that's already been happening, and I don't, feel that we need to be doing any more. Just by having the space and allowing people to have these conversations, and sharing it with other people, is such a beautiful thing in itself. So many wonderful stories that are being shared like every single day through the ecosystem. So thank you for everything that you all do at Service Space, and for all the wonderful work that you've been doing, and voluntarily at that. So that's really like inspiring for me, just to take back.
You feed into us and we feed into you, and we are all feeding into each other.
The way the world works.
Beautiful. So I think we can close this conversation with a minute of silence.